Well, here we find ourselves in Morgan Hill, California, and we're visiting our good friend David Brown, who served in the Wolfhounds in 1968 or 69 and 70. And David, first of all, I want to thank you so much for taking your time out.
My pleasure.
To be with us this morning. And of course, as we were talking about earlier, it's been raining ever since we got here. And
it's going to be worse this afternoon.
And being a Montana boy, I have suffered a tremendous shock about being in lines of traffic that I haven't seen that many cars since I don't know when. So thank you for coming down. And first of all, what we're going to do is just get a little background on you. Where were you born and raised?
I was born in Santa Maria, California, which is down by Santa Barbara. It's in Santa Barbara County. My old man was a military policeman at Camp Cook, which is in Lompoc. And when Sputnik went up, the Air Force took our base and turned it into the Vandenberg Air Force Base in Pacific Missile Range. And we got transferred to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. So we lived in, and because he was an MP on 24 on, 48 off shifts, he stayed at Leavenworth, and we lived in Kansas City so that my mom could get a job. So I graduated high school in 66 and had been nominated to West Point, but got beat out by a prior service dude. So I went to play football at Kansas State, and I was a chemical engineer student in architecture, and they forgot to tell the professors that football players are supposed to get C's. So I ended up with a 1.6 on a 4.0 on academic probation, my fraternity on social probation, and so I said to hell with it and enlisted as a paratrooper.
I've got to back you up just a little bit. What does a guy have to do to get on social probation?
Oh, fraternity.
Or did I say that? Oh, okay.
Oh, my fraternity.
I'm sorry.
The block there were 4 fraternities on our house. And 3 of the 4 got into altercations. One of the things they did during Greek Week was we had chicken races. And we had one of the fastest chickens around because we had really worked at training it. And the SIGEPs kidnapped our chicken and put him in a dryer at the student union and fluffed him to where he lost his mind.
Oh, God.
So,
I'm not laughing because it's funny, but my God.
It is funny.
Oh, jeez.
So the SIGEPs were exercising their chicken in their backyard, and somebody in my fraternity shot him with a 30-06. Oh! Feathers everywhere, went through a door of the car, and instantly the 3 fraternities that were social got on probation. The 4th one was farmhouse. All they did was study and work. So they escaped punishment.
That's actually an awesome story.
Yeah, well, you know.
Tell us about your football career.
Well, I started in high school. I started out as a tackle, but sat down one day on a long run because I was tired. And Gino the Bear, the guards and centers coach, policed me up. And then I became a middle linebacker when we were on defense. And when I went to college, I was supposed to be a middle linebacker. And I was, you can't tell it now, but I was small at the time. I was only like 205, which in the Big 8 is not big enough to be anything other than a safety or a water boy. So I got beat up pretty good. And because of my course curriculum, I had a little difficulty, with all the practice and stuff, getting things done. And so school was the last thing that got done. And then I had a meeting with the dean, just like in Animal House. He called me in and told me that life as I knew it was over. And so I sort of shaped up. I was going to all my classes, and I had all B's when I decided this is stupid, they're after us. They sent 2 Greyhound buses to Kansas State to take us to the AFI station for our examination. So I figured they're gonna get me sooner or later, and since I lost my student deferment,
I was gonna ask you about that.
that's how I avoided the draft. I just enlisted in the paratroopers. And then when I went home and told my old man I'd done it, he said, if you're that stupid, why didn't you join the Marines? Because he hated Marines.
Sure. How old were you when you actually got
19.
your induction?
19.
Okay, 19 years old.
Yep, March 17th.
How did you feel
1967.
about that when you raised your hand and all of a sudden now you are in the United States Army?
I didn't have a problem with it at 6 in the morning at the AFI station. Then they put us on a bus to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. I don't know if you've ever been to Leonard Wood.
I have not.
God put the rocks there to keep the mud from sliding off the hills. And it was frickin' cold. And by about midnight that night, I realized that I might have made a mistake. So I volunteered for every school the Army had to get off Fort Leonard Wood. I even volunteered for explosive ordnance disposal.
So AIT was Fort Leonard Wood.
No, basic was Fort Leonard Wood.
Okay.
And then our company commander wouldn't issue us winter gear because the cycle before us had lost or stolen $2,000 or $3,000 worth of gloves and parkas. So he wouldn't give it to us. So I was the first of 23 in my platoon to go to the hospital with pneumonia. After that, everybody in the company was sent to Fort Polk, Louisiana, except for 7 of us. And we couldn't figure out why. But they transferred us to Fort Ord, California for infantry AIT.
That's where I took my basic in AIT.
And it turned out, we ultimately found out that was because we had been selected for OCS, but they hadn't told us. So they sent us on a slightly different track. And then Fort Ord was the best post I was ever on. Good weather.
Monterey?
Oh, it depended on whether the light was red or green. If it was red, I'd hitchhike to San Francisco. If it was green, I'd cross and go to Monterey. And if I didn't want to go either of those, I'd just go sleep in the sand dunes.
Sure.
You know, and you could get a...
Those were the days when you could actually hitchhike
Oh, yeah.
from Ord to San Francisco, and
Yeah.
people would pick you up.
I've even gotten rides from cops
Sure.
back in '67.
Yep.
And Italian Swiss was 85 cents a quart, and you could get a dozen day-old donuts for $1. So you could wine and donuts for the weekend if you couldn't go anywhere else. You know, you got no money.
Sure.
We were making $96 a month
That's right.
before the 6 1/4 for the savings bond and $1 for the Red Cross and $1 for the first sergeant's haircut fund, whatever that was.
So at the end of AIT, did they bring you in and give you the pitch? Would you like to go to OCS?
They didn't, it wasn't a question of whether you wanted to, it was here are your orders. And so I went to infantry OCS at Fort Benning, and then while I was there, I tried again. I applied for flight school, because I had applied for warrant officer flight before. And they have, one of the questions on there is, why do you want to be a pilot? And by then, I'd been in the infantry for 1.5 years, and I put, pilots sleep in beds and eat hot meals. And they thought that was a decent answer. So
Sure.
I got sent to Fort Walters, Texas for primary helicopter school. By that time, 19, I was now 20. And I got thrown out of flight school for flight safety violations. I flew an unsafe aircraft after an incident and got in a fist fight with a maintenance crew. I was doing a cross-country flight and the bird caught fire and I did a precautionary landing and I'm sitting in a pasture with a bunch of cows. And I thought, well, it's going to be 4 hours before they know I'm gone and another 4 before they find me. Screw it. So I just turned on and off, did various things and didn't smell smoke. It turned out my radio had burned. So I picked it up and flew back to the stage field, had a little discussion with the maintenance people, and ended up on the bus. And then I got a flight evaluation board sent back to the infantry where I belong. And as I was calling up Department of the Army looking for more schools, because there was a time when you thought that if you could stay in school long enough, the war would be over. Because, you know, they used to tell us we were winning.
Yep.
And the man said, "How'd you like to go to Ranger School?" And I said, "No, thank you," and hung up.
Did you even know what Ranger?
Oh, hell yes.
Oh, okay,
because
by that time.
in OCS, we had a 10-day Ranger problem. So
Okay.
we had a sort of a short course, and this would have been in the winter, and winter Rangers suffer because it's cold. And so the next day I called him up and said, "Oh, what else you got? How about you send me to heavy mortar school?" Oh, and he said, no, before that, went to jungle school in Panama. And then I called them up and asked them if they had any more, and they said, "No, you've been to enough school, you're going to Vietnam." So I went 3 days, 3 days between Panama and Vietnam. But it was okay, because I'd already been used to the heat, and the humidity. And I already had camo, which we were not supposed to have.
Sure.
At least in the Hounds when I got there.
And that was what we used to call the tiger suits, right?
Oh no, actually the tiger ones were a different camo pattern.
Okay.
For our little friends and allies.
Yes.
The American camo at the time was what they call Northern Woodland pattern. It's sort of like a duck hunter's type.
Yeah, okay.
Only green, you know.
And you would have stuck out like a sore thumb because the rest of us were just
Oh yeah.
Army issued.
Oh yeah. And so
green.
I only wore that uniform when I was attached to other special ops units. Like, you remember the airboat company down in the special forces down
Yep.
at Trecu?
Yes, I do.
And so one of my rewards for after my time online was I was a battalion liaison officer. And the special forces and the ARVNs would never tell us where they were, and we were always afraid that we'd shoot them up with artillery or whatever, because the radar would pick them up. So our solution was to send me in a radio with them. So I'd go out on patrol operations with the special forces team out of Trecu, up and down, because they had a bunch of, I mentioned airboats, like you saw them. Like Gentle Ben, they got these Florida swamp buggy things, and you can skate across the swamps on the west side of the river, and so you can really cover a lot of territory. But there were only 12 Americans and 1 Vietnamese interpreter and 300 Cambodians.
Oh boy.
And they were a treat. We had them divided into 3 groups. So we had the one group we called the track team, because if you fired a shot, they'd take off running for home. We had another group that we called the hunter-gatherers, and they would convert M16 rounds to birdshot and hunt frogs, seagulls, hand grenade fish, and so they were sort of self-sustaining. And the third smaller group we called the brush shooters. They would shoot anything that moved, or if they heard a sound, they'd, like one time we'd go up to a house and they poured about 1,000 rounds into the house before they knocked on the door. So I always tried to go with them because it was a lot safer, and because I couldn't keep up with the track team. If they took off for Cambodia, I was dead. You know, couldn't run on water. So when I first got in country, I was a platoon leader in Charlie Company.
I was going to back you up just a second.
Okay.
When did you get into Vietnam?
February of '69.
Okay. And when you landed there, did you have any preconceived notions or feelings about, you know, what it was gonna be like in Vietnam or what you were gonna do?
Not really. I'd been in training for so long that I basically thought I understood what I was gonna be doing. And I could actually read a map. But as we flew in, remember how they burn garbage in their front yards? I
Yes.
thought the entire country was on fire.
Yeah, you're right.
And when they opened the door, it was like, what is that smell? And so that was it. And I spent a couple of days down in Saigon before not Saigon, at Tan Son Nhut. Then they put us on a C-123 and shipped people up country to where they were going. And so we flew into Cu Chi, standard flight. And then they put us in the preschool, or we called it charm school.
Right, right.
The design to learn the unit SOPs, mines, booby traps, and to
Right.
give people a couple of days to get used to the heat and humidity.
Well, and when you were going through that little course, every once in a while they'd explode a concussion grenade next to the trail and everybody.
Oh yeah, but we didn't have to worry about that because I got there and had my 21st birthday during Tet. So we had shit blowing up everywhere.
Sure.
Because one of the guys I hooked up with in the school was this old sergeant, E7 or 8, and he was on his second or third tour. And so he went down to Buckeye, you know, the village
Yes.
outside the gate,
Yep.
and got a couple bottles of wine. And we were laying on a bunker drinking wine when the first rockets came in. And I thought, cool, fireworks for my birthday. Then shit started blowing up. And then we were running sweeps inside Cu Chi for a couple of days because several of them got through the wire. I think they blew up 11 helicopters that night. So.
And some of them come up through the ground in the
Oh
tunnels.
yeah, oh, the tunnels. Tunnels are just, you know. I was even, at my small, I was too big to go in the tunnels, but a few years later, I finally convinced my wife to take a vacation to Vietnam, and I sent her down in the tunnels. She didn't like it.
So when you got to Charlie Company,
Yep.
you were given an assignment or orders. Where did they send you right from the get-go? Where were you to?
I was a platoon leader, and at the time, Charlie was up in Tay Ninh chasing
And you're
rockets.
a second lieutenant at
I'm a
this?
second
Okay,
lieutenant
okay.
at the time. I made first lieutenant 2 weeks later.
Okay.
And, you know, basic, oh, well, here's the map, here's our ball game, go walk around in the woods and try and find something. And at the time, they were rocketing the hell out of Tay Ninh, and part of the division was up in Tay Ninh, near Tay Ninh City. And so we do sweeps during the day and ambushes at night for a while. And I can't remember when they actually moved us, but there was an interim leap. They moved us back to some bridge.
Trang Bang?
No, that's later. Northeast of Saigon. Because we held a bridge for a couple of days so that the 11th ACR, 11th Armored Cav, could go wherever they were going up there. We were only over in that a couple of days. And then we went to Trang Bang, Fire Support Base Stewart. Stewart has 8-inch guns. Remember
I do.
You were at Stewart, right?
Yes, I was, yep.
Big mothers, slow cyclic fire, loud. There was also a battery of 155s there.
Yep.
And the 8-inchers would rock the ground and shake it so much that there was like a little fog of dust that it would raise up.
Mm-hmm.
And we would run sweeps, daytime sweeps out of there, and then we'd do ambushes at night. And that was how I managed to get my transfer to Delta.
Let me ask you this. Who were the first guys that you remember in your unit when you got out there? Do you remember some of the guys?
Yeah, Jamie O'Brien, first lieutenant.
Okay.
Lieutenant Jamie, he was, he was the company commander. I don't know who the company commander was before him, and he'd been a platoon leader in, and they bumped him up. Joe Baker was a platoon leader, and then he took a grenade to the face and was, for a while, was pulling fragments out of every time he'd shave. And they made him company exec.
Yep, that's right.
Phil Dean, Ranger Dean, he was a platoon leader, and they pulled him offline and made him, they put him in charge of the Crips, the recon.
Yep.
So he moved from regular uniforms to the Vietnamese style camo, and they moved him down to Bao Tri and the sugar mill down on the Vam Cô Dong River. And so they ran independent co-ed operations and were co with the Arvins. And Sergeant Marquez, who, when we were up in Tay Ninh, we were on ambush, and a point team walked into our ambush, and Marquez grabbed one of them by the throat, and the Vietnamese started screaming, and the machine gunner woke up and shot him out of Marquez's hands. And I think that was the second time he'd been in hand-to-hand combat, so he decided that he was too old for this shit, and he found himself a job in the rear I think he was teaching mines and booby traps at Charm School. So we had no senior NCOs out in the weeds that I can recall. I mean, all the platoon sergeants were E6 shake and bakes, so that was it.
And when you went in, you were made a platoon leader.
Oh yeah,
Okay,
that's what
and
second lieutenants do.
okay, and did you carry a M16 and a sidearm, or what was your?
I started out carrying an M16 and a 45. It wasn't the Army's 45. I had my personal one, because I'd learned stateside it was a lot easier on riot control to use your own gun, because then you don't have to clean it and put it back in the supply room or the arms room. So I had my own 45 and a M16, and I broke my M16 at Stewart, because this guy was attacked one of the sergeants, and I choked up on my rifle and hit him over the head, and it broke my rifle in half. So I used a Car 15 for about a week that I got out of the supply room till I could get another rifle. And then ultimately at the Bobo, I ran out of ammunition a couple times. So I was picking up weapons from dead guys or wounded guys on the ground, and I picked up an M79 grenade launcher. So I used that until I ran out of ammo, but I kept it. And so after that, depending on what the mission was and how long it was, I'd either carry the 16, the duper, but always the pistol, and always 2 hand grenades in my pockets. So
I want you to go back and think about what I'm about to ask you. What was it like on the very first ambush patrol that you took out? In other words, you huddled all your guys up and you said, okay, this is what we're going to be doing. Describe to me that very first one that you took out.
can't even remember it. I was a bit more conservative than some people. I didn't, because I've been doing patrolling in Panama, and I never held with putting one man in one spot, the chance of somebody falling asleep. So I would double them up and put them in pairs. So I basically would set them up 3 in 2 or 3 positions with a crew, so that if you start to fall asleep, I can hit you. Mm-hmm. And that way, I thought it gave them more confidence. I also took my turn, both carrying ammo and doing duty in in the ambushes. But I don't remember if it was the first one, but there was one up at Tane Inn, and we were spread out in the line, and the shooting started, and I remember putting my 2 canteens in front of me and being concerned that the buttons were keeping me from getting low enough. Canteen's not going to do anything to
Sure.
stop around, but it was psychological that it was there. But we did not dig in and do holes. When I was running them, we would go to a place near where we were supposed to be, but we'd wait for it to get dark
Yes,
and
yeah.
then creep into where we were
Yep,
supposed to
yep.
be. And if possible, as much cover as possible. Up in Tane Inn, you know, they had all those old graves, and they had rock linings.
Well, and that
Rice
was
paddy
the
burns.
only elevation in the neighborhood.
Oh yeah, it's like New Orleans. And, well, that was the other problem, there's what point of digging in a hole if you're gonna drown in it?
Exactly.
And during the monsoons, you know, you learn to sleep sitting up, because if you sleep on the berm, you roll off and you end up in the patio and it makes
Yep.
noise.
Yep.
So I was a stickler for, tried to noise abatement, keep things quiet.
What?
Some people didn't like that I also didn't allow smoking.
Oh, yeah, we never did either. And we had a guy that insisted on doing it, and so we were up close to the Cambodian border on an AP, and he thought he'd be clever and put the poncho over him. And the next thing he knew, he was waking up after Marquez hit the butt of his weapon
Yeah, well,
and literally conked him out.
some of the guys would take matters into their own hand, because if a guy was going to be a risk to him, you had to put him in the hospital.
Yep.
I mean, might not be right, but you owe it to yourself.
Do you remember the first time one of your men either got hurt or killed?
Yeah, we were,
And what were the circumstances
well,
around that?
again, we were out on a sweep, and I can't remember his name, blonde guy. He'd been a construction bulldozer operator in the world, and tripped a booby trap, took it to the face and chest. It wasn't fatal, but it was bad.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had to, and I always thought that it was my fault, even though it wasn't, you know, because he's in my group.
Exactly.
And then out at the Diamonds, you know, rockets and mortars and people get killed. And then when I was in Delta, I had a 3-day run where I lost 3 RTOs in 3 days, all to booby traps. We were working west of Jackson, and you know, you got civilians and booby traps in that area, so that's like down at Shamrock, the place was lousy with them.
Yep.
So,
In Dodge City East and West,
Yeah.
that was a very dangerous place to go
Yeah.
into.
and well, and food, and there's a town, it wasn't even a town, there was a spot south of Jackson where they sent us, but I was with Delta then, where we had to build a hard spot and turn it over to the Rough Puffs, the Vietnamese National Guard. They didn't show up in time, so we had spent many days there, and we really resented doing it in the first place, so we only dug the bunkers about 4 feet deep. So they were too small for us, so we all slept outside. But the base was so small that 2 platoons were out every night on ambush, and 1 platoon was in with the company headquarters. And that place was lousy with booby traps, and one day I went out to the helipad first thing in the morning, and I picked up a bunch of mackerel cans and other ones and brought them in on a string like fish and gave them to my CO. This is bullshit. But we weren't there that long, and then I don't remember if we went from there to Diamond or back to Jackson, because we were in and out of the Diamonds several times. And
Do you remember the first time one of your guys got killed?
actually, the first time any of them got killed was a Bobo. I mean, guys got dinged, but no, killed the Bobo.
That was a bad day.
Oh, it was a very bad day. 9 killed, 17 wounded out of 54. Well, actually, if you count everybody, there were probably 100 people out there. Stars and Stripes said we took moderate casualties. Didn't feel moderate to me.
Yeah, but don't forget they were acceptable losses.
Oh, yeah. Well, and see, they didn't
I'm sorry,
count.
that was, I was
know.
being a,
They didn't count the Vietnamese and SIDS because some of them ran away. SIDS is Civilian Irregular Defense Groups. They're mercenaries. But yeah, that was a good shootout, and I was really pissed because I was with Charlie Company at the time, because I had been transferred back from Delta to help Languinette in Charlie, because morale was very bad in Charlie being stuck down at Shamrock. And we were out on Palace Guard, which is a light duty sweep in the northwest of Jackson, and we were the reaction force for the brigade. And we got a call that Delta was in trouble down, because they had been sent in to rescue the Special Forces team that got ambushed down on the Bobo Canal comes off of the Parrot's Beak, which is a feature on the Cambodian border. You know, we had the Parrot's Beak, the Angel's Wing, and the fish hook, you know, what it looked like on the map. And so we were told, get ready to go. We lined up for a 9-ship lift. They came in, apparently Brigadier General Camp told the captain that we were going in, and there was a platoon left in contact. We killed almost 190 of that platoon, and from documents that they got later, it looked like it was 3 infantry companies escorting a hospital and a heavy weapons company, because they had machine guns. And they were, again, it was on the infiltration route from Cambodia to Saigon, but okay, you know about an artillery firing fan.
sure.
All these bases, they can cover this much space. Sometimes it's overlapping. This was a stretch where the only thing that could reach it was the 175 battery out of Tan An. And in this particular fight, we were so close to them that we couldn't use any artillery with it. And the gunships had come in over our heads, shoot down the hedgerow, break off, and then they'd pop back up because they had spider holes in prepared positions. So it was a hard fight.
Do you remember who the company commander was at that time?
Of which?
Of Charlie Company?
Charlie Company, that was Bruce Languinette.
Oh, so, okay, so he was at that point?
Yeah.
Yeah, when he made
And then Jim Kotrick was CO of Delta Company.
And of course, Kotrick was named after him, Fire Support Base.
Well, actually, it was originally named after Ritter's, but Ritter's didn't want it named after him. He was in the hospital at Camp Zama at the time. And so they named it after, because Darrell named it, and he named it after Kotrick because he died at the Bobo.
And remember Waterloo was named after one of the guys in Charlie Company, little hard spot, Waterloo?
I don't know that I ever went to that one.
Okay.
Or recall it. I don't recall it.
I remembered the name of the lieutenant that I was asking you about early
Okay.
on in the deal, Leninger. Leninger. And
I don't remember
and he was
him.
very short and well-respected, good
He may
leader.
be before my time, because
Okay.
I do not recall that name.
And then when I found him, he was living up in Michigan, and then a couple of years later, he called me and he says, I'm moving to Canada. And so that's where he's residing now. But Leninger, it finally came back to me.
Well, and we had Crazy Castona, but I think he was in Delta. And he said he liked it, and he was a Ranger. And when it came time for him to come offline, he popped off to Colonel Odie and said he liked it out there. So Odie left him in the field an extra 6 weeks, I think. So the next time the topic came up, he took the support platoon leader job. So he resupplies and, had
Okay.
10 5-ton trucks.
Besides Bobo Canal, what was one of the really significant battles that?
Oh, try the Diamond series. Somebody decided that the best way to interdict the infiltration trail was to build a hard spot on top of it, or patrol bases. And so we had the series, Diamond 1, 2, 3, and 4. And they would fly out, they'd build up a hard spot, sometimes 2, and they'd split the artillery battery, 4 guns, so that one was here and one was here, and they could cross support, which solved the problem of the firing fan and the ranges of the weapons. But it gave you reduced. And like at Diamond 1, we were new at this. We had only pushed up a little bit of boom. They had those little Kubota tractors, and pushed up a berm, and we had 1 row of wires. And when we got a ground attack that night, and we got hit by 2 regiments, and I think it was the A Company lost their ambush LPs.
That's right, they did.
Because they got trapped outside the wire.
Yep.
In Delta, Lieutenant Sullivan, and I think it was, I don't remember if it was Diamond 1 or Diamond 2, but he was outside. They were sent out on one, and he didn't like it. So they didn't even take their gear off. They just sat, and then when the ground attack came, they ran back into the wire. And he was throwing hand grenades over his shoulder. He got a Silver Star for it. And then he was kind of nervous, and so they took him offline and sent him up to command the security detail at the top of Nui Ba-Din. And that was so nerve-wracking, he demanded to come back out online.
Talk about a...
Oh, yeah. Well, all the line units were using it as a dump to get rid of, they get a levy of, we need 2 men, and so they picked the 2 worst that they didn't want and dump them. So you had this band of misfits at the top, and Nui Ba-Din is a big mountain. It's sort of like Mount Diablo over in our area. It sticks up, it sticks up out of the rice paddies. It's the southernmost mountain in the highlands next to Nui Ba Ra. And we used to say it was hollow. It's full of bad guys at the bottom. We owned the bottom and the top, and they had the middle. And it was a rocky mess. I went back and visited it when I went back on my vacation there. And there's a Buddha up there. They've converted it, or the mountain area is now an amusement park. It has skyline rides, it's got a water plume, it's got a midway, no Americans. We were the only 2 Americans in sight.
You sent me pictures of that.
Did I?
Oh, yeah, I
okay.
was absolutely floored.
Oh, okay.
I mean, because I just remembered what it was.
Yeah.
And when you sent me those pictures, I thought, this is nuts.
Oh, I know it. It's crazy. And so I was up, I did my salams to Buddha up at the top, and the little old lady came up and asked me if I'd been there before, and I said, oh, yeah. But, yeah, and then Diamond 1, 2, and 3, we got hit every time with ground attacks. Diamond 4, they must have been tired of it, because we were getting better at it, because we had berm up, two rows of wire and bunkers and fighting positions. The first day, we were like gophers, digging holes. And no ground attack ever came there, but we were having to patrol the border and, run up and down and chase them, so.
Do you remember when they would drop those butterfly bombs between us and the border?
Yeah.
And then they made us go out and blow up the ones that didn't go off?
Yeah, and AO Keep Out. There's a 1,500-meter strip along the border where they planted these cluster bombs, and we were out sort of cleaning up the edge on that, and there was something in the weeds that I didn't recognize, some electronic piece of equipment, and it was next to one of the pineapple plants. And so I blew it up. Turned out it was a CIA listening device.
A Doppler or listening? Yeah.
I don't know what it was, but since they didn't brief us,
Hey,
it was,
too bad.
yeah, they can buy another one.
Sin Loy.
Yeah.
Did you get to take an R&R while you were in Vietnam?
Oh, yeah. Yes. In September, I was completely offline. Theoretically I was offline. I was in the battalion headquarters then. And I went to Sydney.
And that was a prize.
Oh.
Australia was the prize.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Round-eyed women.
Yes. What was it like in Australia?
Fantastic. The Australians liked us. When I was in flight school, we had 13 Australian pilots in my fight class. And so they told me all about it. And the R&R Center and the place, it's all like the Tenderloin. It's all in the rock and roll nightclubs and women. But I would take the bus and go out into the suburbs and stay with soccer clubs and people that I knew. I met a couple of nursing students, and so we'd go part knee walking drunk and part normal people, and go out to the beach and around. And if I'd had more money, I'd have considered going AWOL and staying there for a while. I actually thought about it.
Sure.
But
you weren't the only one.
they are used to us, so it's practically a security detail at the hotel to roust your ass and put you on the bus. But I met this lieutenant commander, a Navy guy, and no, he was a lieutenant, which is a captain. Army captain, Navy lieutenant. And he was telling me about his base outside Saigon. So when I got back in country, I took a detour on the way back to Cu Chi. And I'll be goddamn if they didn't eat lobster. Because he told me they had lobster and steak for dinner. And what do we have? B2, beef with grease and potatoes. B1A, beef spiced. But that one was good because it had fruit cocktail.
Or peaches.
Well, the canned peaches came, that was in the B1As, and the trick was to take that and that nasty pound cake and blend it together to something edible.
Right.
And yeah.
Here's a little unknown fact. Remember the little chocolate wafer that we got in the seas?
Yeah.
Do you know what those were?
Inedible.
They were energy bars.
Yeah.
And they held about 4,000 calories.
Yeah.
And the Army said, well, these guys are burning up 10,000 a day. We got there's not enough calories in the seas. So they actually created this thing and they go, well, you know, they'll all eat chocolate.
Yeah,
And
oh yeah.
that's quite a story behind that.
Well, and didn't know what cappuccino was at the time, but you take the coffee and the sugar and the creamer
Yes.
and the cocoa powder
Yep.
from the seas and mix it all up.
True story. I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah,
So how many months total were you in Vietnam?
1 year and 3 days.
Okay. And were you wounded?
Oh yeah,
And tell us about that.
which time?
We start at the beginning.
Well, I got hit in the legs twice in Panama, but that doesn't count because we weren't there and we weren't at war. Remember the square lake west of Jackson?
Mm-hmm.
We were out on a 2 or 3 day sweep and I got hit. I was with our Chuhoy, my demo man, and me, and everybody was having breakfast and we went out to clear the trail beforehand because that area was lousy with booby traps. And my Chuhoy tripped this booby trap that was a M26 hand grenade. And so we turned around and took off running. And I wasn't fast enough. So I got hit in the back with M26. And it knocked me down and it shredded my shirt, but we walked back to where the CP was, and I was still in Charlie then. And he said, "Oh, what went on?" And I just turned around and showed him my back, and he goes, "Oh." And the medic sort of patched me up.
Mm-hmm.
And under the no other crews available concept, I wasn't hurt bad enough to merit a dust off because I was still walking around and I have a fairly high tolerance for pain. And so I stayed out in the weeds for another 3 days. And it's really a pain in the ass to try and sleep in a hammock on your stomach. You don't bend that way. So I eventually took a supply truck back to 25th Med, and they checked me out, but their x-ray wasn't working, so they gave me my uniform and sent me over to 12th of Act to get x-rays. And so they looked at the x-rays and said, yeah. And the state of microsurgery back then was such that they wouldn't go near the spine unless
No
they really
invasive,
had to.
yeah.
So they stayed in and they kind of encapsulated. A couple of them worked out over time. I still have, I think, 3 pieces left in me. I don't set the alarm off at the airport anymore, but I did. I had civilian surgery one time and they took 4 sets of x-rays before they had enough sense to ask me what the shiny spots were. Then the second time in country was in September, and I was out with the Cambodian airboat people, and we were in a night position in Trang Bang, and we got hit, and the guy next to me got shot in the leg and was hopping up and down and screaming in Cambodian, and he bled all over me. So I thought all the blood was his, but I got hit with an RPG in the arm, RPG fragments, not bad. Didn't even know I was hit, because you know when shit blows up, I mean rocks and gravel and stuff fall all over you.
Not to mention the adrenaline.
Yeah, so in the morning, I went back to Jackson for a briefing and to see the medics. They patched it up, and then I was not going to let them do anything serious because I was coming up on my R&R to Australia, and there's nothing going to get in the way of that. And then a month or 2 later, I got hit in the chest. I was down in the Tactical Operations Center at Jackson, and a mortar attack started, and like a dumbass, I ran up the stairs and out into the mortar attack. But it came through, you know how you have those L-shaped doorways?
Yes, mhm,
The
yeah.
blast bars?
Yeah,
And so it came through the blast thing and absorbed most of it, so it didn't hurt me too bad. Then I shouldn't count the one I got shot in Kansas, but that wasn't official military.
was that at Leavenworth?
No, that was out in Abilene.
Oh.
We were out pheasant hunting, and my roommate shot me.
And what kind of award were you given for that?
Nothing.
No, I'm just kidding.
I just bled a little.
Speaking of awards, what, did you receive any awards in Vietnam?
Yeah, I got a CIB.
Okay.
I got a Silver Star for the Bobo. I got a bronze for something. I was promised another Silver Star for the Dodge City, but didn't happen. All the raters and endorsers were dead. The usual air medals. I've been
Sure,
here, I've
sure.
been there. Da-da-da-da. I got a Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry. I got a Vietnamese Civic Action Honor Medal, because I got loaned out to our little friends and allies a few times as a liaison, you know.
Yeah.
My liaison, since they wouldn't tell us what they were doing and they couldn't speak English, solution was you go with them.
And then you tell us what's going
Yeah,
on.
because it's in my best interest to make sure they don't shoot me up.
Mm-hmm.
And the little guys liked it because I would get food resupplies for me, and I would share.
And you probably had some support at your disposal.
Some, but like you say, standing out. I'm only 5'10". All those 5'4" guys are down here, so
Yep.
it's like a tree in the wilderness. But you also stand out because you're waving your arms and pointing.
Sure.
Your RTO is standing there 6 feet away from you because he can't get a longer cord. You know, it's
When did you leave Vietnam?
March of 70.
And what do you remember about when you hit the United States and you were back to the world again? What do you remember mostly?
Well, I was convinced that I was going to have to fight my way off the plane, and because we weren't very well appreciated at that time. But I had the advantage of, one, being from a military family, and two, I wasn't getting out. I didn't get out. So instead of going back to Oakland and then over to Travis or to the Oakland depot to get discharged, I just went to the airport and went back to Kansas City. So I had I had to go and pick up my car, which I'd left with my parents, who moved away and left it with my brother. And then I drove to Fort Benning, Georgia, to visit Kotrick's sister-in-law, who I was engaged to. But the family was so bent out of shape after he got killed
Yeah.
that they didn't want anything to do with the military. To her credit, she didn't dump me until I got home. But so then I went to, checked in at Fort Riley, Kansas. And at the time it was the 24th Infantry Division, but they reflagged it to the 1st Infantry Division a couple of weeks later, so I got to change patches twice. And it was funny because when I signed in at division headquarters, there was this major who was the OD, and I only wore my CIB. I didn't wear the rest of that
Right.
stuff. And you know, everybody's got at least 3 medals, the bin badges, you
Yep,
know, the
yep.
Alive in 65,
Yep.
National Defense, and the Vietnamese Service and campaign medals. So everybody's got at least 3 if they were over there. So he told me to, 1, get a haircut, and 2, put on all my uniform, all my stuff. Because you gotta be in uniform to check in.
Oh my
So
gosh.
I went out.
Welcome back to the world.
Yeah, so I went out and I got the haircut I didn't need, and I put on all my shit, and I went back in. And I had 2 more rows than he did, and I said, "Happy now?" And so I signed in, and they sent me up to what turned out to be the 1st of the 28th Infantry Black Lions, and we were Panzer Grenadiers, mech infantry. I absolutely hate mechanized stuff. Regular infantry's okay, but you know, you got to babysit those things, you got to do maintenance on them, command motor stables, and we were a reforger unit. So every winter, we had to go back to Germany to prove to the Germans that we could support NATO.
Oh my.
Because they had stripped Europe for Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
But, so we had 3 sets of equipment. A set of equipment at Fort Riley and 2 sets in controlled storage in different warehouses in Europe. So we would fly the division to Europe, drag our stuff out of storage, fix as much of it that rolled, drag the stuff that didn't roll, and repair it along the way, drag it to Munich, then get on a plane or a train, and then go up to, I forget where we got off, and then we would do simulated operations with NATO up and down the Czech and East German border. And the Russians, we entertained the Russians. They would follow us around in big old Mercedes with heaters and take pictures of us. So, like I was a company commander, and in my company they got a lot of pictures of moons and birds, because every time we'd see them, we'd flip them off.
Sure, sure.
So I'm not sure what they thought about our fighting capabilities, but you have to pay for maneuver damage. So the concept was we couldn't drive our tanks and APCs around Germany till after the fields froze. Once the fields froze, it's like being in Montana.
Yep.
Except we're tactical, so we can't put the canvas up on the Jeeps. It sucked. I hated it. I loved Germany, but I did not like being in the field in the snow.
Mm-hmm.
One year at Fort Riley, in order to save money, we did Winter Victory in January. We spent 30 days in the field with no vehicles and no heat and lots of snow. I hate snow. That's why I live here in California.
Mm-hmm.
I can't stand it. And so I bounced around there for a while. Then I got out, went back to college, went in the reserves, tinkered around. I'd zigzag in and out of the reserves and back onto active duty for a while, depending on what my school schedule was. Then I got out and I retired as a major. Except that.
Were you married at that time?
No.
Okay.
No. I avoided entanglements. One, like I said, I have a military family. I don't like what deployments do, and I didn't want to leave any widows and orphans. So I didn't, no. In fact, I got myself transferred once to avoid getting married. Felt bad about it, but it was better off for her. And she married some armored guy, some tanker. So it's not a big deal.
Did you stay in touch with any of the guys that you served with in Vietnam?
Initially, no. Because I was still in the Army and moving around. And actually, I did run into Colonel Odie at Fort Benning one time in the elevator.
Minus a foot?
Yeah, dumbass, trying to make B Company walk through a minefield faster. Pardon my French.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about.
He is not a fan of mine. When my son was at West Point, and in his first year they had this research project, and he was tinkering around, and he tried to crack into my records at DA, and he couldn't get into them, but he did find the Wolfhound website that Dana Martin was running, you know, Sham Time. He was a 2nd Platoon sniper. And so he said, "Have you seen this?" And he sent it to me, so I called up, I signed up on the list and sent an email to Dana. And he sent me a note and asked who I was with, and I told him, and he called me about 10 minutes later. And because he was at the Bobo too. And I found out from my son that they were going to have a mini reunion at the Wall. And my son says, we have Veterans Day off, why don't you come get me and we'll go?
Sure.
So I went up to New York, spent the weekend with him. Turns out Veterans Day was on Tuesday. The Army might give you the day off, but West Point doesn't. So he couldn't go, but I went on down to the Wall, and you've been.
Surely, yeah.
Okay, well, you know where the Three Amigos are. And that's the statue of the three guys.
Right.
The nurse's statue's behind it.
Right.
And I was sitting on a bench and talking to any 25th Division guy that came by. And while I'm doing this, I see this group of guys who are talking, and they're talking about something. And so I go up and I tap the one guy on the shoulder, and because they were wondering about Carlos Saladino, he was my machine gunner. And I went up and tapped the guy that was on there, and I said, are you looking for pineapple? Which is what we call it. And he says, yeah. I said, well, he's right there. And so within about 5 minutes, we hooked up with 6 of the guys from my platoon.
Oh, my goodness.
And it was all,
Wow.
and I had put on a bit of weight since the Nam, so when I went up and said something to Pineapple, he's looking at me like, who the hell are you? And I said, hey, I was with you when you won your Silver Star at the Bowo Canal, asshole. And he goes,
Yeah.
I must know you.
Yes.
So, and it was funny because it was like everybody moved back into their position. We were walking across the mall and they got in formation.
I'll be darned.
It was weird. I tried not to get in formation. And when I was in OCS, I used to carry a camera around to take pictures so that I wouldn't have to be in the parade.
Yeah.
And I hated marching. I did enough of that when I was a private, you know. Dark 30 in the morning waiting for the sun to come up? No, thank you.
I've got an interesting question that I'd like you to think about and,
Okay.
and give us an answer. What is your definition of a hero?
Don't know that I have one. You know, because some people say, oh, that's so, you know, and part of it is because my old man retired as an E7, and all my life, you don't get a medal for doing your job. Don't expect any accolades or awards for it. So it's kind of hard to put up with, you know. You bust your ass and it's like, okay, what else you got? And so, hero, I don't know. They always talk above and beyond and great credit, but you basically do it for the people you're with. And, you know, I didn't give a fuck about the government. You know, I didn't throw hand grenades for the president. So, I don't know.
Did you ever serve with any heroes?
Sure, a whole bunch of them. But they were just doing their job too. Well, some of them did more than they should have, maybe. Except that, how can you say they did more than they should have? That's what you do, what it takes to get your people out of there. You know, so it's a tough one for me because I don't know that you can say, like me, oh, I got medals, but I don't know that I'm a hero. Theoretically, somebody else would have done it, although we all know that half the people at that battle had their faces in a bomb crater and weren't about to stick up.
Yep.
You know, so. You know, and that one, well, okay, Colonel Ritters is a hero. One, he got out of the damn helicopter and used his helicopter for dust off. And I don't know if you'd ever dealt with the colonel, but he had dropped out of the sky. Odie used to fly around and give orders, but rarely came on the ground. And he'd just throw smoke grenades and make you go 20 miles out of your way.
That's right. Yep.
But Ritters would actually get out and walk the ground with you, because he walked 2 or 3 operations with me before that one. And you know that he and Lieutenant Thompson got wounded. They came down on the thing. They walked past Saladino, who was on the far end, and Saladino told them not to go out there. The guy popped up out of a spider hole and did it. And then got them both. And Ritters was fighting with the NBA dude for Thompson's rifle. And he ended up beating a guy to death with his helmet. You didn't know that?
No.
Oh, yeah, he killed a guy in hand-to-hand combat with his helmet while wounded. Now that's a hero.
Mm.
Oh, if you aren't aware of that, are you aware of the Wolfhound Tales?
The what?
The Wolfhound Tales, or Tales of the Wolfhound?
No.
Write down for Google purposes. Dutch McAllister was the battalion XO for a while, and he was a for real historian, and he wrote up a whole bunch of actions of ours, and there's something on the Diamonds, there's 2 on the Bobo Canal.
Renegade Woods.
I think the Renegades are in there,
Mm-hmm.
but last time I was in the Renegades, they'd been all knocked down,
Yeah.
which was really stupid because he gave them really good places to hide,
Mm-hmm.
and lots of Coke can booby traps. I don't like the Renegades. But yeah, take a look at that, and Gary Hubert's,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, oh, yes.
his website's got a list of guys,
Sure.
and there's some contacts on some of them. But yeah, no, Dutch and I corresponded a lot, and same with Daryl, and not so much, but he was a West Pointer too. Ooh, and the Colonel, see, my guys from the Bobo are fearless. We get together once, sometimes twice a year, and on the 29th of July, they all call the Colonel. He takes our calls. And in fact, he's going to host a party for us next July, 29th, if he's still alive, because
Yeah.
he's got to be in his 80s. But he lives part of the year in New York and part of the year in Texas, be near his grandkids. And he was at the Pentagon for a while. But no, he's a good man.
Last question I have for you is, what advice do you have for today's generation and the many generations to come?
Sign up. Make a man of you. I mean, you do a lot of growing up in the Army. And if you don't have, and I don't even care if you enlist in the Army or even the Navy, but some concept of national service, like Australia and Israel have.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
Because like, my son did two tours in Afghanistan, one with JSOC in special operations and one as an infantry company commander. And even among our friends, we only have one other friend who was in the military. Less than 2% of the country currently participates.
Correct.
They have absolutely no concept of what we're doing and why. And there is a concern that a truly professional Army could end up becoming the Army that does the coup and takes over. So you owe it to yourself and your country to participate.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like people who don't vote. You ought to be just put a mark on them and say, get out of my way. You don't have a right to complain. So, I don't know, long-winded answer, but
That's perfect. Well, I want to thank you so much for, this has just been a great interview.
Oh, good.
And of course, I never know what, I mean, you got to understand, I'm just here to have you share your experiences. Well, I've got to tell you, you've actually been one of the best interviews
Well, I thank you.
that we've done, and I know the extent of your service.
Well, a lot of guys don't talk to people much.
I know.
They bury their head. And it's just like Dana he won't return my phone calls, or because when I first talked to him about being at the Bobo, and at first contact, he says, "Oh, I thought you were dead." I go, "Oh, okay." And have you ever read Grossman on combat or on killing?
No.
Dave Grossman was a psychology professor at West Point. He's written a couple of books on what these things do to us. Because I was always thinking that the Bobo was 15 minutes long. And that fight was actually 6 hours long. And I've read the after-action reports to Congress and the Special Forces reports afterwards. And so I now know. But in Grossman's book, he talks about, and one of them, it focuses on cops and shootings and stuff too, that you turn your head off, or your brain shuts down certain functions so that you can focus on what you've got to do. And so when people ask me about the Bobo, I have this relatively narrow view of it, and I don't know what you are, because Languinette sent me from Charlie over to Delta. I don't know what Charlie was doing once I left, other than the fact that there was a really nice online assault of the hedgerow. Because Colonel Ritters wrote it up as the best assault he'd ever seen. And when I asked people, what did I do? Again, like Pineapple, his son is working on trying to get his medal upgraded. And I said, I didn't see what he was doing. I heard it, but I was busy doing other stuff.
Yes.
And when you get down to it, we lost every platoon leader in Delta, company commander, medic. We lost company commander and a platoon leader over in Charlie. So who the hell knows what's going on?
Yeah.